And welcome to the Blue Collar Wealth Club podcast. I am your host, Jerry Garcia.
I am Sheena White, your other host.
We're going to discuss a little bit of our biggest wins by discussing some of our biggest wins in our lives and careers, kind of get you motivated to earn some of those yourself.
I guess I could look at biggest wins a couple different ways, so I'll say a few. When I first think about it, I think about going back to college, actually. I went to college for 2 years at community college. Because I didn't have the money for college, and so community college was the only thing I could really afford at the time. And then I ended up taking 3 years off because, life happened, and I took 3 years off. But then I went back to school. I lived about 2.5 hours away from campus. I actually commuted 2.5 hours each direction. I also worked as a bartender. And I was able to get 2 degrees from the University of Washington. I think of that as a big win because it shows a couple things, really perseverance. Most people I don't think would commute 2.5 hours each direction.
I did, not for college, but I did, yeah. I did a 2-hour each way commute when I was working for a nonprofit in Brooklyn, New York from Long Island.
Yeah,
I feel that.
It sucked, right? It's not fun. Driving across a bridge to then take a train for an hour to take a bus for an hour. I really wanted my degree, and at the time I wanted to be a doctor. It was what I had to do in order to get there. So I'd say when thinking about my kind of pre-career life, that was a big one.
I'll go back to one of my earliest wins, I guess. One of my first jobs. I think my first job ever was working in nonprofit. I was a peer educator for a nonprofit called Mikasa Resource Center for Women, which actually still exists here in Denver. My role and all of the other high school age people that I worked with, our role was to go out to high schools, educate about things like teen pregnancy prevention, STD prevention, all that good stuff. In that same field, I eventually transferred to a new role at Children's Hospital, which that was great all by itself. Applied for a scholarship with my colleague. There was 2 of us who were kind of younger working in that role. We applied for a scholarship. We had already attended a conference within the last year in New Orleans. The Children's Hospital wouldn't pay for another one. They wouldn't pay for a second. So we applied for a scholarship to present on peer networking. We're immediately turned down within 2 hours. They said, look, we're not giving any sort of scholarships to anybody from first world countries. They were really providing scholarships from those coming from third world countries who wanted to attend and learn more and take that education back to their countries. Then a couple weeks later, we get an email that said, hey, we've decided to provide 2 scholarships to people in the U.S., and we got one of those spots where we were able to go and present on peer networking. Having that background in nonprofit and working with several other nonprofits in similar areas, we worked with the homeless shelters, we worked with agencies that worked with LGBTQ youth, various other agencies. We were able to help network, and that way if somebody came into our circles, we were able to kind of direct them to where they would get the best services. Getting that scholarship and being a presenter at the first ever national conference on HIV/AIDS in Canada is definitely a bigger win that I wasn't even thinking about presenting when we discussed this topic. I was 21 at the time.
I talk about this a lot with clients, especially when I'm talking about vision. Having a really vivid vision for where you want to go is really important, because if you aren't telling your brain where you want to go, it just kind of wanders anywhere, and it's not necessarily where you want it to be. So really creating that vivid vision in your mind of where you want to be, I think is really important. I always tell this story to where I think it was about 6 years ago now, I was challenged by a vision coach to write down what I want, just to really think about in myself, like, what do you want? What do you truly desire? I wrote down every single thing I wanted, where I wanted to live, what I wanted my life to look like, what I wanted my career to look like, and specifically what I wanted a partnership to look like romantically and in business. And then I looked at it, I just kind of broke down and started crying, because at the time, my life looked absolutely nothing like that. Drastically different from it, that I didn't even think that what I wanted was possible, because I wanted to be consulting full-time, doing what I do now full-time, and I wanted to be able to give my kids. I wanted a super supportive partner at the time. I was almost 2 years ago when we bought our house, and I realized that I literally had everything on that vision. I had the house that in the area I said I wanted, the size I said I wanted. I was able to say yes more than no to the kids. I was full-time consulting, doing exactly what I love to do in work, really creating impact in the lives of a ton of my clients. More than anything, I had the relationship that I wanted with someone super supportive. who really could bring positivity to my life and make it better. I think to me that's a huge win because I literally was able to reshape my life just one step at a time from something that wasn't so fun to one that I really visualized for years.
I have another one of your wins that we'll talk down the line. If you don't talk about it, it's one that I want. My next big win is transitioning from kind of one career to the next because I felt like I saw a definitive ceiling in the one I was in. After leaving the nonprofit world, I transitioned. I was moving from moving from Long Island back to Denver, and I really wasn't sure what I was going to do. I'd really gotten into poker. Started dealing poker at bars at first, got a job up at the casinos. But the transition from the casinos to other work is really where I made great money dealing poker at casinos. Mortgage life, I used it in my branding. It's a big part of my background. A lot of my longtime friends come from the poker world. But that transition of leaving the casino is really hard because everyone up there, it's great money and it's really low stress. But it's not the kind of work that you take home with you. I think the kind of work that we do now is much more with us at all times. I'm 23 years old at the time, making great money. I didn't have any kids at the time, able to just kind of take that money and do whatever I want, but I was able to buy a house. But I wanted, once I had my daughter, the job looked different to me in my own mind. I guess it started to seem like a very long, dangerous drive. So here in Colorado, the casinos are up in a mountain town called Black Hawk in Central City. At least the one that I worked at was in Black Hawk. Started to seem like a very dangerous drive. I was working nights, I was working weekends, I was working holidays. I wasn't getting to be around my family as often as I'd like to because that's when everyone celebrates those things and that's when casinos tend to be busier. I had to really try to A, figure out what I wanted to do, and B, figure out how to make that transition. I've seen many people before me after I left who tried to make that jump from casino life into other career, and I felt like most of them did it the wrong way. They just took something and said, hey, I'm interested in this, or I got this certification or license, and I'm just gonna jump into it full bore. Casino employees, most of them aren't great at savings because unfortunately most casino people are gamblers. Unfortunately, a lot of these people would try and dive into a new career. Moving into something as a brand new bottom rung, you're gonna make very little money. And so most of these people went to making half, if not less than half, of what they were already making. They'd last a few months before they ended up back at the casino. Most of them are still back up there to this day. I thought about at least getting into mortgages for a while with a buddy of mine who was in the industry. I went out, took the course, got licensed, came on board just kind of part-time with a company that would allow me to work at my leisure. The first 15 months I did that, really wasn't going anywhere. I decided I had to kind of dig in and get a little more full-time into that position. I switched companies and got into a role where I was there more consistently and doing more of the activities to actually learn this career. A couple years later, I was working both jobs. Go do some mortgage stuff in the morning, leave, go to the casino at night, and just kept doing that for almost 3 years before I finally felt I was in a position that the casino job was now in my way. When you work for tips, there's just not really a scenario where those tips are going to increase over time. Right. And as poker's popularity has started to wane, if anything, those tips have started to go down over time. Things aren't getting any cheaper, as we all know. It's getting more expensive to live, and earning the same money feels like a lot less, and earning less money feels almost desperate to even survive at that pace. Big win for me when I felt like I made that transition from being a poker dealer into being a full-time mortgage loan officer. Worked in that career now for over 10 years.
That's a great kind of story when you think about people who are working in a trade, maybe want to start their own business, trying to see if there's a way that you can do it on the side versus jumping headfirst in, or if you have to jump headfirst in because of, non-competes or non-solicitations agreements that you have with your current company, really making sure that you have a nice nest egg. I remember when I started my first company, that was the only income we had. And we had a pretty sizable nest egg.
That's key, and it's not something that everyone has or everyone has access to. It's definitely important to make sure that you're planning for that. If you're going to start a business where you need equipment, for example, right? If you could take some of the money you're making and start to buy some of that equipment in advance, when you get there, you're ready to roll. Or if you can start planning for, how am I going to qualify for an SBA loan? If you need to work for improving your credit over the next year or two as you're working this job, the best thing you can do is get yourself into a position to where that transition is going to be as seamless as possible. Now, anybody who's made that kind of transition knows there's no seamlessness about it ever. Putting yourself in the best position to succeed is all you can do. Unless you get supremely lucky in some capacity or another, most of it is hard work, it's consistency, it's planning for both the worst case and the best case scenarios in most cases. If you're listening to us hoping for quick solutions, we don't offer that, but we do provide long, like sustainable, foundational.
Long term. No, it sounds bad. But for real, I mean, it's all about compounding, right? I mean, just like compounding interest can hurt you, it can also help you.
The kind of things that we want to teach you are to take that long-term, what may have taken you 10, 15 years to learn on your own, and really shrink that curve. Hopefully we're able to shrink that down to maybe, a 5 to 10 year window now, where you're talking about not only like taking the first 10 years of your business to really become a master at your business. Now you're able to take some of the things that we can teach you and shrink that window down to 3 to 5 years of really like running a well-machined business, and where it would take you after that first 10 to 15 years of figuring out your business, of taking another 10 to 15 years to figure out, okay, now what do I do to kind of grow into the next phase of my life and plan for retirement. Now we could take that next window and shrink that one down 3 to 5 years. And now you're talking about, really accelerating your learning.
So speaking about acceleration, so one of my other wins that I was thinking about is, I don't know why I decided to do the math, but I had seen somebody that was talking about their client, how much income their clients have generated. So I decided to do the math, and I figured out that my clients, just my one-on-one clients, they did over $100 million in revenue last year alone. What?
That's awesome.
I was actually really blown away by it, because I don't actually have that many one-on-one clients. So
yeah,
it's a pretty small number of businesses to then have generated that much revenue. And so I was really excited. I was like, oh my gosh, I have helped people to generate over $100 million in revenue. I just felt blessed by that, to be able to be a part of their journeys and a part of their successes and a part of $100 million in revenue.
Have you discussed was the win from when you transitioned yourself, when you kind of found yourself in a spot where you weren't sure what to do next, when you really decided to take the leap into being a full-time fractional CFO?
So at the beginning of 2021, I owned a concrete company. It was very successful. It was a 7-figure concrete company. I also owned an insurance agency with a couple partners, and we'd actually grown that to a 7-figure insurance agency. I was doing consulting on the side. I was getting a divorce, and that was going terribly. I exited the concrete company because that was a joint in September of that year. And I remember we were actually at a Broncos game, and one of your friends asked me what I do for a living. And I literally was like, I don't know. And she looked at him like, who is this chick? And why are you dating her? Like, what in the world? I realized at that moment, like, I didn't know, because I wanted to be full-time in consulting, but I wasn't really that confident in myself that I could do it. That was pretty much the best thing anyone could have done for me, to encourage me to do that. Almost 3 years later, I can't even imagine anything different. Help more people build their businesses and do work that I love. Well, okay, a big win for you. Since we first met and started seeing each other, you had been talking about wanting to go into private capital and capital raising and all that stuff. And now, you're doing it. And so I think that's a huge win to, follow your dreams.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what I was going to discuss, is kind of getting through similar type of situation. I was going through a divorce a while back and trying to figure out what the next step was after separating from the ex, and trying to kind of really just get my ducks in a row for the next thing, and getting from there, working the mortgage business for a while. I'd been doing it. I really, back in 2019, started researching multifamily syndications and private capital. I really had to focus on the mortgage business to keep the bills paid. And then COVID hit and kind of destroyed all the events that I would have attended to kind of build it. And I really stepped back, and you then encouraged me at that point in time when I decided that I really wanted to do something else. I'm still doing the mortgage business and still very much a part of what I do. I'm really starting to start the private equity company and grow it and build it. I'd say that's definitely a big win, one that I'm kind of in the middle of right now. I think this podcast is also a big win for both of us.
Yeah, so I think, in hearing about our wins, like, we really want to just be encouraging you guys that sometimes it can be what seems like a small thing. For me, just going back to school and finishing college, it can really be a huge win if you think about it. It's really all about perspective. And, one of the biggest takeaways I think we want you to have is just to go after your dreams, right? Whatever is on your heart that you want to create, you really can, with time and with encouragement and with a little bit of help, so that you can really, live out your dreams and really create the business and the life that you want.
That's why we wanted to discuss big wins, because big wins come in sometimes seemingly small form. Taking whatever you've done in your past and whatever you're accomplishing right now and seeing that as a big win is really a great way to just kind of get past some hard times and decide that that's what's coming next. I really need to realize where I've come from and what I've accomplished and celebrate these big wins, because some of these small wins lead to bigger wins, and some of the big wins lead to wins that you didn't even think were possible.
And never to give up and never surrender. Well, we thank you so much for joining us on this episode, and be sure to check out our Facebook group.
And the YouTube channel. We're going to be putting up a lot of content. Some of the stuff you'll hear on the podcast, and some of the stuff will be exclusive to that format. So yeah, definitely hop into the Facebook group, check out the YouTube channel, and keep listening here, and we'll keep giving you the best advice we can.
Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.